I love React and working with components in the browser, but sometimes I don't need a full-fledged front-end framework like React, and that is where web components come in. Web components are built into the browser, and they're a way that you can use components to create applications very similar to how you would with React, Vue, or Svelte. The other really nice thing about web components is you can use them in any front-end framework. If you have a React-specific component, you can use it only in React, but if you have a web component, you can use it in any front-end framework or even just in a plain JavaScript site. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about everything you need to know about web components. I don't think they're going to overtake things like React, but it's still important to know because they are being used more and more. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. And in this video, I'm going to show you how we can create this code over here using custom web components. As you can see, we have expandable and collapsible list, and we have this custom checkbox to-do list section. And if I inspect this page, you'll notice something really interesting when we look at our elements tab. These are all custom elements. As you can see here, we have to-do items, and these to-do items correspond with, if I just expand this out real quick, there we go. You can see when I hover over this to-do item, it's these elements on the right-hand side of my screen. Same thing with this UL. This is considered an expand list, and that gives me all of these other functionalities with these, expandable lists. And you can see as I change them, it's changing the attributes in my DOM here. And you can see if I open up one of these to-do items, we have a shadow DOM inside of it, this shadow root, and it contains all of this custom information we're talking about. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can create these different web components, different ways you can customize them, and all the things you need to know about web components. So to get started, first, how do we actually create a web component? Well, what we need to do is we need to create a brand new JavaScript file, and we're going to call this one to-do item. This is going to be for our to-do web component. So we'll say to-do item.js, and we want to import this into our page. So we can just say that we're going to have a script. We're going to defer this, and the source here is going to be, what did I call that? To-do item.js. There we go. So we've imported this JavaScript file. Now inside of here, we need to use a class. We essentially need to create a custom class. So this class right here is just going to say class to do item. This can be whatever you want to call it. This is just the name of your custom component. And then we need to make sure that it extends an HTML element. So this is just us saying we're creating a custom HTML element called to do item. Then we're going to have a constructor inside of here, which we'll want to call super in to make sure we call our HTML element constructor. And this is where we set up our to do item. For now, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to say this.innerHTML. So this is going to be the inner HTML of our custom element. I'm just going to set it to hi, I am custom. There we go. So now we have this custom element, but we need to register this with the DOM. So we can say custom elements dot define, and this is where we give it a name. This name right here needs to conform to normal HTML attribute properties, and it must have at least one hyphen in it. Now, the reason that this single hyphen is required is because it wants to make sure that you're entirely clear what you're using custom elements and normal elements for, and that's because no HTML element has a hyphen. So by you including a hyphen in here, it's just denoting this is a custom element. Now, the second property you need to pass to this is the class for your custom element. So we define a custom element called to-do-item, and this is defined by our to-do item class here. So if we go into our HTML and I add in a single to-do item, just like this, and I save and I go over here, you can see it's printing out, hi, I am custom. So it's doing everything that I told it to inside of this class. Now, obviously, this is the most basic way of doing this, but this gives you an example of what I'm talking about. If we wanted this to be more like a to-do item, we could just say like, to do one here. So then in here, we could say that the inner HTML is going to be something like, let's make this in, whoops, H3. There we go. Close off that H3. And inside of that, I'm just going to put our inner text. So this dot inner text. Now, if I save, you can see it says to do one. And if I change this, it's going to change my inner HTML. Pretty straightforward. So we're just converting whatever we pass in here to an H3. That makes perfect sense. But you'll notice there's one big problem. Let's say I go in here and I want to change some code. So I'm going to add a style tag here. I'm going to add a style that says all H3s should be red. You'll notice it changes the text here of this H3 to be red. And if I put another H3 on our page, you'll see that that one is red as well. But that's a bit of a problem because generally you don't want to change the styles of things inside of your custom components from outside of them. You want them to be kind of separate from the rest of your application, and all the styles in them don't apply to anything outside, and all the outside styles don't apply to the things inside. Because for example, if I add my own custom style inside of here that says that H3s instead should be the color of green, you'll now notice if I close this off properly, there we go, and I save, it changes all the H3s to green, the ones inside of my custom element and the ones outside of it. This is why generally it's not a good idea to directly set inner HTML on your exact element, and instead to use the shadow DOM. Now, in order to understand what the shadow DOM is, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a select to our page. So I can just come in here and add a select, and let's just put a few options inside of here. So let's say like a value of 1 and 1. We'll just copy that down a couple times. There we go. We have a very basic select with 3 different options. Now, if I inspect my page and I look at that element, you'll see we just have a select with some options inside of it. Pretty straightforward stuff. But this is actually using a custom shadow DOM underneath, and that's how it gets all of these custom styles. In order to see what's going on, if we click on this cog icon here and we scroll all the way down to the very bottom, you'll see this section called Elements, and it says Show User Agent Shadow DOM. If we check this to be true, and now we go look at our select again, you'll see we have this shadow root, and it's showing us that we have here this area hidden true, and then we have some slots, and each one of those slots contain each one of these options, as you can see right here, and this corresponds with the slots that they're inside of. So really what's happening behind the scenes is when you add a select element to the page, it's adding in this additional HTML for how all the different styles for everything goes, and it includes things like the style sheet for how your options show up and how your select shows up. Now, obviously, this is not how you generally want to work with your page, so I'm going to check that off so we don't see that anymore. You can just see we get our normal options inside of our select, but that is essentially what we want to do with our custom elements as well. And that way, it's all encapsulated in its own single thing. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. What we can do is we can come into here, and I can say that I want to have a shadow DOM. So we can say the shadow is going to be equal to this dot attach, attach shadow, and that's going to attach a shadow DOM. And the really important thing here is you need to specify a mode. You're going to have the modes of open or closed. Generally, you're going to want to go with the mode of open, and that just makes it so that you can make modifications to your shadow DOM by just saying this dot shadow root. If you have closed, this dot shadow root is going to be null, and if you set it to open, then this is going to be equal to the same thing as the shadow up here. Having it open makes it a little bit easier to make changes to your custom element when you have things like, attributes that are changing. So I generally leave this as open, but it's entirely up to you. So now what we can do is we can say that the inner HTML of our shadow is going to be this HTML here. So now what we can do, and generally what I like to do when I'm doing custom elements like this, is I like to create essentially a template. So we'll say const template is equal to, and our template is going to look like this. We can just paste this in here. And actually what I want to do is I want to first create a template. So we can say create element template. So this is going to create us a template element. And then I can just say template.inner HTML is going to be equal to this text right here. And I'm going to remove that $. And generally I like to, style this a little bit better. So it would look something like this. And we can put an indent here, here, and like this, and then let's add a data attribute to this. For example, we can say like data title. There we go. So now we can easily select that. So here is our template. And what we can do is we can say that our shadow is going to append on the end of it our template. So we can say template.content, content.clone node, pass it in true, and that's just going to make sure it clones everything inside of that template. So then what we could do is we could say like this dot title equals shadow.querySelector, and that's going to get anything inside of our shadow. I want to get that data attribute, title. And then I can say this dot title dot inner text is going to be equal to, let's get the inner text of our element. There we go. Now you notice though, this doesn't quite work. And the reason for that is because when you have elements that are being passed along like this inside of your custom element, where we just pass in our to-do option like this is technically considered a slot. And with custom elements, you can pass along any type of slot you want, but this is just the default slot. So that means whatever you pass into here is going to be defined by the properties of slot. So what we can do is we can say that this is going to have our slot inside of it. Just like that, bring that down. We can even get rid of this data attribute here, and we can get rid of all of this code right here. Now when I save, you're going to see that this to-do shows up. So what's essentially happening is we have a slot, and a slot is just a placeholder for content. By default, whatever you put inside of your custom element is going to be considered in your slot. So all of that text right here, to-do 1, is considered our slot. And you can see our slot is right here, so it just places that content directly inside that H3. Now, if we change this text to say something else, you can see it perfectly updates. Another thing that you'll notice, which is really interesting, is our H3 inside of here is green because it's being styled by this style, but our H3 out here is not being styled. And that's because when you have a shadow DOM, all of the styles and content inside of it never leave that shadow DOM. So all of these styles for our H3 only stay within this to-do item itself. And if I remove this, you'll notice my text is not red, it's actually black. And that's because all the styles from outside do not leak into my Shadow DOM. So it's like a closed off environment when nothing comes in and nothing leaves it that shouldn't leave or come in. That's really useful when you want to do things like styling. Now let's go ahead and actually take this a little bit of a step further by adding in what we want to do for our actual to-do item, because we want it to look like this where we have a checkbox and some text. So what we can do is we can get rid of this H3, and instead I want this to be a label. And inside this label, I want to have an input, which will give a type of, checkbox, just like that. Close off that input. And then we'll put our slot, which is where our text is going to go. There we go. Make sure I close that off. And then finally, we'll close off our label. Also, I'm going to do some styles on our label. So we'll say that our label has a color of red and a display here of black. So now if I just give that a quick save, you can see we have a checkbox and then we have our labeled text. And if I have multiple to-do items, so let's say we have to-do 2, to-do 1, and to-do 3, you can see they're showing up just like this, and they all have their own individual checkbox. Now, another really great thing about web components, which is actually something you can't even do very easily in React, is that they have the option to do more than just one slot. We can do named slots as well. So let's say I wanted my default slot to be here, but I wanted to have a small description next to it. Well, what I could do is I can come in here and I can put a span where let's give it a class here of description. Close off that span. And inside of that span, I want a special slot, and this special slot is going to have a name. So we just give it a name, and in our case, we'll call it description. It doesn't matter what the name is, and we'll close off that slot. So now I can pass a slot with this name into my HTML. So for this very first one, we're going to have our normal slot, which is this text. And then we're going to have a custom slot with the name of description. And in here, I'll just put small text, for example. And now you can see that small text is showing up, and we can even give it some custom styles to really delineate what's going on. So we can just say font size is going to be 0.65 rem, font weight is lighter, and the color here is going to be 777. There we go. So now if I give that a quick save and refresh, you'll notice it's not quite working, and that's because I accidentally did this the wrong way. So what you want to do when you want to use a slot is you want to give it an element. In our case, we'll give it a span here. And then instead of putting a name here, you put slot, which is going to be the same as the name. So slot equals is going to correspond with the name of the slot you gave it here. And then it's just going to copy paste whatever this element is, which in our case is just a span. So if we look at this element and we inspect it and we go to the Shadow DOM for this, you can see if we open up this shadow root here, we're going to have our label. Inside that we have our slot, which contains our normal text. And then we have a span with our description, which contains a slot for our description. And that slot is just this span right here. So it just takes this span and essentially puts it directly in wherever that slot is. So inside of that slot right here is just whatever we gave this as a name. So that whole entire span is going to show up inside there. If I made this a div, for example, you'll notice that now it's on a different line because it's placing a div inside there, which is a block level element. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are life cycle events that you can use on your different custom elements. So let's say that we wanted to be able to add an attribute on here that is going to be for checked. So we could just say checked equals, and it's going to be like true or false, or we can just leave it like this where it's going to be true. Now, what I want to do is whenever this attribute changes or whenever I load my page with this attribute, I want to properly check my checkbox. So the first thing I could do is I could come into here and I could say like this.get attribute, and I could get that checked attribute and I could determine if it's there or not and figure out what my checkbox is going to be. But what happens if my attribute for checked changes at some point? I again want to be able to take that into account. So what you can do instead is there's a callback you can use. It's called attribute changed callback. And this is just a function that is going to take the name of the attribute that changes, the old value for the attribute, so what it used to be, as well as the new value or what it is currently. And here I'm just going to console log name, old value, and new value so we can see exactly what's going on in here. So if I just inspect my page right now and I go to the console, you'll notice nothing's actually showing up in the console. And that's because in order to check which attributes change, you first need to say that you want to observe these attributes. So you need to set a static property, which is a getter, and you want to say observed attributes, just like this. And what you want to return from here is an array of all the attributes you want to check for. So in our case, every time the checked property changes, we want to make sure we do something. And you can pass in whatever you want inside of here, like the title, for example. And only these attributes will cause this attribute changed callback to trigger. So now if we inspect our page and we look at the console, you'll see that it says checked, null, and then we have nothing. And that's just because our value is blank. If we were to say checked equals true, you'll now see that it says checked, and then the previous value was null, and then the next new value is true. So that's exactly what's happening there. Just bring it back to how we had it. Now what I want to do is I actually want to create a function that's going to update this checked property for us. So what we can do is we can just say update checked, pass it in a value. And then what we can do is we can get our checkbox. So we can say this.checkbox, but that's not actually going to give us our checkbox. We need to get that from our shadow. So generally what I like to do is just add the things I'm going to use up here. So we're going to say this.checkbox because I'm going to use this in other places. And that is just our shadow.querySelector of our input. That's just going to get the single input element we have right here. Then I can get the checked property of this, and I can set it equal to my value. So if my value is not equal to null, and my value is not equal to the text of false, then I want to check my checkbox. So now if I just call that function here, so I can just say if the name is equal to checked, well then I want to call update checked. I want to pass in the new value. So now you can see immediately our checkbox has become checked because when our component first loads, that attribute is considered changed, which means it calls this update checked function. Now to make sure this is truly working, what we can do really quickly is we can just select one of our items by saying document.querySelector of a to-do item. That's just going to get our very first to-do item. And then what I want to do is I'm going to set the checked here to true. I'm going to set a quick little interval. So we're just going to say that checked is going to essentially negate itself. So it's going to be the opposite of what it currently is. And then our item, we're going to set the attribute for checked to our checked property. And I want to do this every half a second. So now you'll notice every half a second, our checkbox should be changing between checked and not checked. This is obviously not working though, because I wrote this code here incorrectly. Here we go. So now checked is equal to the opposite of checked. So now if I save, you'll notice every 500 milliseconds, my checkbox is checking and unchecking itself. So this right here is just showing you that when the attribute changes, it's recalling this code, which is then calling this function for us and updating the actual checkbox. Because you'll notice if we inspect our page here, this checked attribute is on my to-do item. It's not the same checked attribute that's on my checkbox inside the Shadow DOM. These two are completely separate from each other, and that's really nice. You can set attributes on your main element, and then you can persist those down wherever you want. Now there's a few other callbacks that we should know about. The first one is going to be the connected callback, and this is just called whenever you connect. So we can just say console.log connected. So this is like whenever you add an element to the DOM, it's going to call this connected callback. And as you can see, it called it 3 times because we have 3 elements. We also have one for disconnected. So we can just say disconnected, type in disconnected here. And what I want to do here is I can just say item.remove. That's going to remove that first item. So you can see here, we have 3 that are connected, and then my 1 got disconnected when we removed it, so it calls disconnected. And disconnected just gets called anytime an element gets removed from the document. Now that covers the basics of creating a custom element, but what happens if you want to extend an existing element? In our case here, we have these expandable and collapsible lists where we're extending a custom element that, or not a custom element, we're extending an element that already exists by making a custom element from it. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new file. I'm going to call it expandable list.js. There we go. And it's going to be similar to this to-do item here, where we're going to have a class and we're going to extend HTML element. But I don't want to extend HTML element. I want to extend the uList element, which is just a UL element. So in order to do that, what we can do in our HTML here, we can import that expandable list right here, just like we were doing before. And now instead of typing out something like expandable list, what you need to do is you need to have a normal UL element, and then you need to say that it is a particular element. So we can say is an expandable list. And now we're saying that everything inside of here is expandable. So we can say first, second, just like that. So currently it's just going to render perfectly normal, and that's because we don't have this expandable list element yet. So we need to register our expandable list. Let's just do that. So we can say custom elements.define. We want to define an expandable list. We want it to be our expandable list. And then the key here is we need to tell it what it's going to extend. So we can say extends a UL. So we're saying that now this expandable list is going to extend any UL element. And again, when I save and refresh, you'll notice there are absolutely no differences, and that's because we're doing nothing right now with our expandable list. So what we can do is we can do a constructor, make sure we call that super method. And what I want to do here is I want to add a brand new button. We'll say this.toggle button is equal to document.create button, or I'm sorry, create element, and we want to create a button element, and I'm going to give it some specific styles. I'm actually just going to copy all of these styles over. So here we go. We have a bunch of different styles for this. Essentially, we're just absolutely positioning it in the top left-hand corner. But in order to do that, we first need to say that this element, which is our UL element, we want the position on that to be relative. There we go. So now we have our button. It's not showing up because we need to give it some text. So toggle button dot inner text, and we want to set it equal to this symbol right here. Now the last thing we need to do is add this toggle button. So we can say this dot append child, and we want to append the toggle button. There we go. So now you can see we have that button showing up right there. And if we inspect our page real quick and we look at our elements, you can see that our UL element, which is an expandable list, has that position relative being set on it, and it has this button element with all these custom styles being added to the very end here. So this is kind of the key here, is that we're able to take a normal UL element and we're able to just customize it by adding different things to it, which is really great. And you'll notice for this, we're not actually using any shadow DOM related stuff. And that's because we're customizing an already existing element. And in most cases, it's easier just not to use the shadow DOM in those cases. Now, the final thing I want to do is on my toggle button, I want to set up an event listener. So we're going to add an event listener here for when I click on it. And again, we can do all this stuff. Anything you can do with the DOM, you can do inside of a custom element, which is what makes it so powerful. And I just want to call a function that is going to take our data attribute for expanded, and I want to set it to the opposite of my isExpanded property. And this is going to be a custom property that I just add on here, isExpanded, and it's just going to return this .dataset.expanded, whoops, not equal to false, and this .dataset.expanded is not equal to null. And this is just checking to make sure that the expanded property is currently false or missing, essentially. So if it's there or it has a value that's not false, it'll be considered true. So this is just toggling between those. So when I click on this, you'll notice that this data expanded property is going to show up and it's going to toggle between the two. So you can see it's true, and then it's going to be false, true, false, true. So it's just toggling between those states. Now, obviously I want to be able to listen for those changes. So we can get our observable attributes, which is a static property. There we go. And in this case, all I care about is that data attribute for expanded. So I can say return data expanded. There we go. So every time expanded changes, I'm going to call that callback for changing attributes. So if we look here, that is just the attribute changed callback. So we can paste that in. And now every single time that this property changes, we're going to call this function. Now inside of here, I'm just going to call a function called update styles, which is a custom function we're going to create in just a second. So I can come down here and I can say update styles. And inside my update styles, I'm actually just going to copy this code over. So the way that this code works is first we're determining if we need to rotate our button with if it's expanded, rotate it, otherwise don't. And then what we're doing is for each one of our children, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we hide or show the item depending on if we're expanded or not. Now another thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we do the same thing whenever we connected. So we can do our connected callback. And I want to call this .update styles as well to make sure I update the styles when I connect for the first time too. Now in our case, what I want to do is I actually want this to be expanded to start. So I can come in here, I can say data expanded, and that should be expanded to start. And now you can see when I click on it, it's currently not working. Let's see what our problem is. If we inspect, go to our elements, and we look at this element here, we click on this. It looks like it's toggling between things just fine, but I'm guessing that something is wrong with our observable attributes. So let's look at our expanded one, data expanded. That is correct, but it looks like I spelled this wrong. This should say observed instead of observable. So now when we click on this, you can see it's toggling between them. And the nice thing about this is we can actually nest these inside of each other. Let's have another one inside of it. And you can see I can toggle this one, it'll hide all of them. Same thing here. So this is really cool that we can do all this. And it's all with just extending the currently existing UL element. Generally, I find that I don't do this as much when I do custom elements. I almost always do completely custom elements because extending things is a little bit more difficult since you have to exist with the things that are already there inside of HTML. And a custom element that's completely from scratch, you can do whatever you want. But it's nice that they're both available, especially when you just want to make minor modifications to things that already exist. And that's all there is to web components. If you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend checking out some of my React videos to see the compare and contrast between them. I'll link those right over here. With that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.